Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. In this episode, Dorsey interviews another special guest that will give you hope and inspire you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining me on another episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Today, we have a special guest with us. His name is Scott LaPierre. He is the teaching pastor of Woodland Christian Church in Woodland, Washington, and author and conference speaker. He holds an MA in Biblical Studies from Liberty University. Scott and his wife, Katie, have 9 children, and they are passionate about homeschooling. Scott is a former school teacher and Army officer. Scott, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, glad to be here, Dorsey. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's a privilege.
Absolutely. How did you go from a former school teacher to becoming a pastor?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. One I'm always thankful to be able to answer because it's really my testimony. I was not raised in a Christian home, and I was an officer in the Army, and then I became a school teacher and coach. And when I was coaching and teaching, my brother died of a drug overdose, and some friends invited me to a Christian church. And I went to that church and heard the gospel for the first time, became a Christian soon after that. And I could elaborate. I know we're talking primarily about finance because I could probably take 30 minutes just sharing all this with you. And so I became a Christian, and I really thought I was going to teach and coach for the rest of my life because I enjoyed it so much. But then once I became a Christian, I really found my passion for ministry increasing and my passion for school teaching kind of decreasing. I guess you could say I wanted to tell students, I wanted to tell people to open their Bibles versus tell students to open their math books. And so then a position for a part-time youth pastor became available in the town where I was teaching. And it worked really well with my teaching schedule because I had weekends and summers off with my youth. And then the church grew, and then they hired me full-time as an associate pastor. But I really wanted to be a preaching or teaching pastor. And so my senior pastor mentored me to become a senior pastor myself. And then we came to Washington in 2010, and we'll spend our lives here. And so that's kind of the short story.
Okay, the short story of a longer version.
Uh-huh.
Well, now, where did you grow up, and did that affect who you became?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Northern California, a very small town. My wife and I grew up there together. And so it definitely did affect me. I wasn't familiar with, kind of big city and probably some of the things that I might have been introduced there. And again, I wasn't a Christian at that time. So there's decisions I wish I would have made differently and things that I'd done differently if I could go back. My in-laws still live there. And so we go back there and visit our hometown. Sometimes it's about 8 hours south from here.
Besides being a Christian and being a pastor and telling others about Christ, what's your biggest passion, would you say?
Oh, okay. Very good. So I like writing. Maybe I shouldn't say it that way. I like taking my sermons and turning them into books. That might be the better way to say it. And I also like doing some speaking. I get to do some traveling and speaking. My elders graciously give me about 6 to 8 weekends per year to go do some speaking. It's primarily marriage conferences. After my marriage book was published, that kind of opened the door for marriage conferences. And so earlier this year, I was in Georgia with my wife, in Oklahoma to do different marriage conferences. But that's pretty much that. That keeps me pretty busy along with my family. 9 kids. Our 10th child is going to be born in October.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What made you write your book, Your Finances God's Way?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So if I make this kind of simple, let's say there's 2 ways that pastors prepare sermons. One way is they kind of have abbreviated notes. They might even use like note cards or some cardstock and put notes on it, kind of reminding them what to say, jarring their memory. Maybe they have a bit of an outline. And then there's another type of preacher who writes out their sermons or manuscripts them. And I'm definitely in that category. And so my wife is a real wonderful spiritual woman, and I go over my sermons with her. So she saw how hard I was laboring over my sermons. And I'm polishing them, refining them all week. So by the time I get up to preach that sermon, I'm super familiar with these notes, and I've really written them out very thoroughly. So Katie was always telling me, hey, I need to turn my sermons into books, and I kept putting it off because I was so busy. And then I finally preached on marriage at my church, and the running joke is it was supposed to be the marriage month, but it became like the marriage year because I just kept preaching on marriage, and people seemed to be enjoying it. And so Katie said, hey, this needs to be your first book. You need to take these marriage sermons, turn them into a book. And so that I just kind of jumped into it. I had no idea what I was doing, super ignorantly thought I'd kind of go to the Thomas Nelson website, give them my manuscript, and then they're going to turn it into a book for me. And if you don't know this already, all big publishers and most mid-sized publishers and even some small publishers have one statement on their website: we do not accept unsolicited manuscripts. And so that's a whole other story, because I could tell you about how you send query letters and proposals and get a literary agent and all that stuff. But after I wrote my marriage book, I wrote a finance book, a book on work and rest. God's Way is kind of my brand, Your Marriage God's Way, Enduring Trials God's Way, Work and Rest God's Way. And then I preached on finances at my church and turned that into a book, as well as more kind of on stewardship, I would say, but there was also an amount on finances. And so then that became Your Finances God's Way. But really, that was born out of just seeing another need in my church. I don't write separately from my preaching ministry. So if it's in a book, I've preached on it, because I don't have the bandwidth to write separately from my preaching.
Right.
And so I'll see a need in my church, and then I might preach on that, and then that ends up becoming a book.
Yeah, I know what you're saying with the preaching, because I do the same thing as a preacher myself. I write out every word, that I'm going to say. I write it out, word for word. And I'm also an author, so I know how difficult it can be to, get your book out there and get it published and whatnot. I learned the second way when I updated my book. I learned, go straight to Amazon and have them sell it.
Yeah.
How is Your Finances God's Way different than other finance books?
Yeah. So kind of speaking of the publishing journey, if you're fortunate enough, or you work hard enough, or however you want to say it, to get in contact with a publisher, even get a publisher to respond to you, one of the questions they're going to want to know is, how is your book different than all the other books on that topic? So, for example, I mentioned my marriage book. Well, they want to know if your marriage book is like all the other marriage books out there, there's no reason for us to publish it. And so with my finance book, when I was dealing with Harvest House, your proposal is going to answer a lot of these questions. You're going to compare your book to other books and distinguish your book from them. And so what I told Harvest House was, this book is thoroughly biblical. It's not just practical financial advice, although there is some of that. It's more of a spiritual book, talking about the heart and how we're stewards and how we're supposed to steward God's resources, finances being one of them, for His glory, for His kingdom, have an eternal spiritual perspective on our finances, which is really the perspective we should have on everything: marriage, parenting, employment, and work. And so there's a lot of finance books out there that tell you how to invest, or give you instruction on saving and so forth. I want to kind of deal more with the heart and help people be good stewards of their finances. Although that we do talk about saving, giving, retirement, investing are in the book as well.
Right. Do most people have an income problem or spending problem?
Yeah, good question. Most people have, at least in the United States, have spending problems, plural, versus an income problem, singularly. So if you live in the United States, you're more than likely, there can be some exceptions for any of your listeners. I don't want them to get offended, but for most of your listeners, or perhaps all of them, if they live in the United States, then they are some of the wealthiest people throughout not just the world, but throughout all of human history. And then some people say, well, things are more expensive here. Things are more expensive here, but I even have a chapter in my book, and there's a section where I talk about how wealthy we are as Americans. Even when you take cost of living into account, we're still substantially, depending on the country, anywhere from 2 to 100 times wealthier than people in other countries, even factoring in cost of living. And so when you make that much money, as Americans do, then you more than likely do not have an income problem. You have spending problems. And so that's what a lot of my counseling involves. If people tell me they want to get counseling from me for finances, I tell them before you come in, you need to bring in your financial statements so I can see them. And I need to see your spending over the last couple months, and I need to see how much money you make, because people generally kind of look at their finances this way, and I'll use round numbers. They say, okay, we make $7,000 per month, and we only have, our mortgage payment is only $3,000, and then we have, $2,000 going, or $1,000 going toward our vehicle or vehicles, and we spend $1,000 on food, so that's $5,000. We should have $2,000 left over, but we find that it's very tight every month and we're not able to save. And what you notice is the spending problems eat away at that $2,000. And so I generally try to address those spending problems with people, like a lot of small purchases they make that end up adding up over time. The number of times that they go to Starbucks, the number of times they eat out, the number of extra things they buy when they go to Walmart or Target. And I'm not at all saying people can't, eat out or go to the movies. We actually just went to Sound of Freedom, and we don't go to movies, but we wanted to support this movie. And so I'll just put a plug in for Sound of Freedom. We took some of our oldest kids, and we thought it was a really incredible movie. So I'd highly recommend anyone, and I have no horse in that race. I just think it's a great movie, and I'm thrilled to see it succeed. It deals with a very important topic. And I was glad to go throw some of my money, toward that. But otherwise, we don't really go to movies much. And I'm not saying you can't eat out or go to Starbucks, but but that's where that $2,000 goes, and most people don't know that. And so when you bring in their finances and you say, hey, there's this, and the next thing you know, if you go to Starbucks, like any coffee shop on the way to work 5 times, per week, and you do that, you spent about $7,000 on coffee in just a few years, and people are shocked to see that. The other thing I talk about is what I call worthless purchases. And I don't mean it's a worthless purchase and that the item doesn't have any value. I mean that it's a worthless purchase to the individual. And so a worthless purchase is something that you don't use or that does not benefit you over time. And so if you bought that piece of clothing, no matter how nice it is, if it just sat in your closet and you didn't wear it, that's a worthless purchase for you. If you bought that item and it just sat on the shelf in your garage, or the top of your closet, that's a worthless purchase for you. So worthless purchase is just something that had no benefit or value to you. And most of us make many worthless purchases. I talk to people about that, the small purchases that add up. I talk to people, one of the spending problems just deals with impatience. I'll tell people, if you're going to make a big purchase, now big is relative, but a big purchase, let's say a vehicle, we'll use a vehicle. You should wait at least 2 to 4 weeks before making that purchase. And during that time, you should do your research. And one of the reasons that I tell people to wait 2 to 4 weeks is that most of the regret people have associated with bad purchases or purchases they wish they hadn't made, that regret occurs over about 2 to 4 weeks after the purchase. And so if you wait 2 weeks, there's many times where people wait the 2 weeks and then they end up saying, I'm super glad that I didn't buy that. But if you don't wait the 2 weeks, then you end up with the regret. And so I tell people, if it's a big purchase, putting that pool in or whatever the case, then wait 2 weeks. And then the other advantage of that 2 to 4 weeks is to do your research. Just today, we're talking about, I actually had to cut the meeting short to come for this interview, but we have a strip next to our driveway. I don't want to bore you with all the details. My dad passed away and my mom moved in with us. We have an addition. We want a larger driveway. And that means turning this strip of gravel into concrete or asphalt. Well, I've got the guy that came today is the first of 4 to 5 estimates that are going to come out today for me to compare all those prices. But I ended up finding these people by talking to or texting all of the construction guys I know, mostly guys in my church, even some guys that I've paid to do some work on our house. Actually, 2 of the guys I paid are guys who have worked on our house before, Christian brothers. And I said, who would you recommend for this? I didn't go on the internet and search. I did the research by talking to people and get recommendations. So if you're doing a patio, if you're putting a pool in, if you need electrical work, if you're doing plumbing, if you're going to remodel your kitchen, go ahead and wait 2 to 4 weeks before doing it and try to get as many estimates as you can. So have you ever heard of the Stanford Marshmallow experiment before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, for any of your listeners, they should go check it out on the internet because it's a super entertaining experiment. And so what happened was Stanford took these young people, kids, probably I'd guess anywhere from 5 to 7 years old, and they brought them into this room one at a time and they sat them at this table. And then in the middle of the table was a plate with a marshmallow on it. And they told these kids, if you'll wait, and I can't remember how long they had to wait, maybe, I don't know if it was 10 minutes, 20 minutes. If you'll wait, I'll come and bring you another marshmallow, or you can have this marshmallow right now. And you're watching the videos of these kids, and they're like salivating. You can see they're wringing their hands. They're straining at the table, trying not to eat this marshmallow. They're leaning, they're wringing their hair and things like that. And you're almost like watching the video pulling for them, like, come on, you can do it, don't eat the marshmallow. And so this is just the beginning of the study. So then they followed these kids over the next 20 years of their lives. And what they found was very significant. And I'll explain the application for Christians and for finances in just a moment, although I do think it'll become evident. When they followed these kids over the next 20 years of their lives, they found that those who waited to receive the second marshmallow proved to be successful or better than all the other kids that ate, literally in every area of life. They did not find an area of life where those who waited did not end up doing better. Talking about obviously with finances, with employment, with family, with purchases, with education, with income, and with body mass index. They check their body mass index, and you can guess that the kids who ate ended up being unhealthy or having higher fat percentages. And so the whole point of that is the value or virtue of patience and self-control. Now as a Christian, and all of your Christian listeners also know the value that the Bible puts on patience and self-control. So the Bible is giving us counsel that's not just godly, but also very beneficial to the average person. And that's one of the things that I want to, the book of Proverbs is the book of wisdom, and it gives us practical application for daily life. If you're going to apply the book of Proverbs, you're going to do better relationally with people. You're going to be a better listener. You're going to, like James 1 says, you're going to be slow to speak, quick to listen. You're going to be more self-controlled. There's a ton in Proverbs about finances, right? And so, yeah, those are some of the spending problems. People are impatient. And when we purchase, I might be talking too much. Am I talking too much here? You're a good listener.
No, you're fine.
Okay. So here's a situation that happened with us. We needed a new van because we had a minivan, but it couldn't hold all of our kids. We had to kind of take the next step to a 15-passenger van. And so I can't work on vehicles. I pay people to do everything on vehicles for me because I'm not handy. So I don't know what a good price is on a van. And I was not looking forward to trying to get a 15-passenger van, which I thought was going to be a pretty big purchase for my family. And we're a single income. I'm a pastor. We don't have a ton of money to throw around or anything. And so I started this Excel spreadsheet, and because I'm applying the same principle, waiting 2 to 4 weeks and doing all my research. And so on this spreadsheet, I had the different models of vans. I had the year, I had the mileage, and obviously I had the price. And I developed kind of this little formula. And every day, every time a van popped up, I added it to this spreadsheet. And I did that every day. So that I probably had if you have, 5, 6 vans you're adding per day, I probably had 30, 40 vans on this spreadsheet. And by that, a week into this, I could tell pretty quickly the average price for vans and a good price, but I was kind of looking for an exceptional price. And so I wasn't really biting because it wasn't a desperate situation for us. We could still get around. It was a little tougher. We might have to take 2 vehicles instead of 1. But I was watching my spreadsheet so that I could see when something came available. And there's this one day that this van pops up. I plugged the information into the spreadsheet, and it just looked like this incredible deal. It was such a good deal that I doubted that it was correct. The information was correct. And so I called the number associated with that van, and the gentleman said something like, "Wow, you're fast," because I just put that up there and you're the first person to call. And I said, I wanted to confirm that all this information's correct, the year, the mileage, the pictures and everything. And he said, yeah. And so I knew I wanted to buy it, and I didn't think it was going to last long. And so I told the gentleman, I said, well, I'm about 4 hours away. I don't want to start driving there and have you sell the van to someone else. And he said, well, if you'll head here right now, I'll wait, 4 or 5 hours and we'll stay in contact, and I won't sell it to anyone else. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And my dad hopped in the car with me. We drove over there so he could drive the car back. I showed up and the guy said, boy, this must be a really good deal because since you called me like 500, the phone hasn't stopped ringing. And I said, is it not your van? And he said, no, there's a guy that owns a restaurant and he just wanted me to get rid of it because he bought it for his restaurant and he never used it. And that explained why it didn't have any miles on it. And it had this logo with this kangaroo on the side because the restaurant was called the Roo. So it's kind of a unique, nice looking van. We have a bunch of large families in our church. And so everyone has a van. So we actually got, a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people have 15 passenger vans. And so we got to have one that stood out there with the kangaroo on the side of it. And so the guy was really nice. And I said, well, thanks a lot, for selling this. And I think, to be honest, it was probably 30 or 40% cheaper than it should have been. It probably should have been $5,000 or $7,000 more, so I felt really, but the whole point is simply that I wouldn't have known it was a good deal unless I did my research. And so that's one of the things I highly recommend to people. Take your time, be patient, sit on your money. The story of Jacob and Esau, there's a whole bunch of stories in the Bible of people being impatient. Jacob was impatient because he didn't want to wait for the birthright that God said he was going to receive. So he conned his brother. And then Esau was impatient because he would not wait to enjoy his birthright. He was willing to give it to his brother Jacob. So both of them were impatient and it was super problematic. And so the Bible really stresses the value of patience. And so that's what I think is one of the major spending problems, impatience.
Yeah. Going back to what you said earlier about Starbucks, I'm guilty of that because I'm at Starbucks almost every day. I'm definitely guilty of that, And I also work at Target, so I can I can see
pick up those extra items.
Yeah, I mean everybody, all the people buying all these items, like, where do you get this money from? Because I definitely don't have it.
Yeah,
I definitely don't, earn that kind of money at Target.
mm-hmm.
No, we've heard that for years, at least in the Christian faith and Christian community, that the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil. Is that really true, as many of us have heard?
Right. Yeah. So I'm not anti King James. Two of my elders use the King James. I like the King James. There are versions of the Bible I don't like that I would not use, that are paraphrases, maybe like the Message. And so I like the King James, but unfortunately, the original, they translated that verse in 1 Timothy 6 as money is the root of all evil. And so that does two things wrongly. You actually said it more correctly than the King James does. You said the love of money. So that's one of the problems. The problem is not money itself. Money is what I call amoral. It's not moral or immoral. It's just like guns, or it's like vehicles. They're tools, they're resources. And our world likes to it kind of gets things wrong, the world wants us to think wrongly about the Bible. And so the world tells us that guns are wrong. Guns are not wrong. Guns are amoral. It's what you do with a gun that is moral, like defending your family, or immoral, robbing a store. And similarly, money is amoral. It can be used in great ways, giving to the church, supporting the spread of the gospel, providing for missionaries, providing for church planting. And it can be used immorally, obviously, being spent on gambling establishments or going to prostitutes or something like that. And so it's not money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money. And money is not even the root of all evil. Even the way that's worded, it says money is the root of all evil. There's plenty of evil that has nothing to do with money. And so, yeah, that's an incorrect statement. In fact, some of the godliest people I know happen to be very wealthy, but you wouldn't even know it because they're humble and they live modestly, and they use their wealth in very God-honoring ways.
What do you think about debt, and what advice would you give us to paying off debt?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of most debt. I think there's some reasonable debt, and I've kind of changed somewhat even in this area over the years. So consumer debt, which would be debt for like vacations, clothing, food, is debt that I do not think we should incur. I don't think people should have automobile debt. Maybe they've heard before that, once you drive a vehicle off the lot, it depreciates by like 15, 20%. I mean, that's an incredible amount of money to lose. You got to be at a poker table to lose money that quickly. And so a new vehicle is a bad idea. You can buy a new used vehicle or a used new vehicle, however you want to say it, you can buy used vehicles that are very new if that's your thing. And so don't buy it from the dealership, and you'll save a lot of money, and you'll still have something with low miles, and it can be, only less than a year or two old if you want. So but people should not have automobile debt. And the only debt that's reasonable to me is mortgages or the debt, I think, for real estate purchases. I think real estate can be a pretty great way to build wealth and serve the Lord. If you buy an extra house and have it serve as a rental property or an Airbnb, you can also use it for missionaries to stay there. I was just talking to a guy about this yesterday, that there's a house for sale a few houses up from us. We don't have the cash from it, but I thought if we made the down payment and it was a good price, had the mortgage on it, we could use it if missionaries came and stayed. So I do think that could be a good investment as well. But yeah, I'm not a fan of debt, and I think most people need to get rid of their college debt. Credit. I have a credit card to build credit, but people should not be. The rates on those are terrible. So pay off your credit card, as soon as you can after spending money with it.
Right. As we get ready to end here, the last question I have is, what advice do you have for parents who want to help their children be good financial stewards?
Yeah. So we have 9 kids that we're homeschooling, and with the 10th on the way, the homeschooling journey for us doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. And my wife turned, she's 42, I think. And so, we know some people that have kids when they're 45 or 46. So maybe we'll even have another kid or two after this. It wasn't like some people are like, oh, I can't believe you have 10 kids. It's like, I can't believe I have 10 kids. I'm surprised by this too. So if someone said, did you want to have a lot of kids? I didn't want to have a lot of kids. I wanted to have as many kids as God wanted me to have. It could have been 3, 5, 7, 2, maybe none, and then we adopt or something. So this is where we're at, and we're thankful for all the kids God gives us. Now with that said, because we're homeschooling, we don't have to follow kind of the public school curriculum. So I've got a lot of my kids reading real estate books. I'm talking to my kids about finances regularly. I'm talking to them about being good stewards, being frugal. And so I'm talking to our kids about giving. So you need to involve your kids in these decisions you're making. Let them see what you're doing financially. When you buy a vehicle, let them know that you bought it with cash, that you did not go into debt to buy this vehicle. Like even yesterday, there was a minivan right up the street. Well, I talked to the kids about it, came home, took the VIN, put it on the Kelley Blue Book to see the value of it and what they were asking. And I'm talking to the kids about this. I want them to see how we do things. So just involve your kids in these decisions. Even though the Bible says regarding giving, don't let your right hand know what your left hand's doing. I do think it's reasonable to tell your kids when you're giving to the church so that they see the importance of generosity. And so just try to involve your kids, teach them. Because if you go to school, like I went to school, I've got two masters and a bachelor's. I spent a lot of my life going to school. And when I was in school, we didn't learn a lot of financial stuff, which is unfortunate. I was busy taking classes that have no value for me today. Maybe for people that become engineers, it values them. But, I'm taking physics and chemistry and calculus. And just because the direction of my life, none of that helps me. It would have been more beneficial for me to have learned about finances at a young age and start saving. When we make some investments, I told my kids, I said, if you want to invest with me, if you want to give me some money toward this investment, you will get the same return that I get based on, if we give $100 and my kids if I give $90 and my kids give $10, so we give $100 total, my kids are going to get 10% of the return. And I tell them that, and we keep track of all that so that they can get the same return with proportionately than I receive. And so I just think it's really important to involve our kids.
Right. Well, Scott, thank you very much for coming on the show today. We greatly appreciate having you. And where can people reach you, and where can people get your book and find out more about you?
Sure. Yeah, Dorsey. Well, my website, scottlapierre.org, just my name, SCOTTLAPIERRE.org. My website is pretty much the hub, and all the spokes go out from that to my YouTube channel, my podcast, my books, my speaking engagements. And you can find my social media profiles from there, but you can find my sermons, my conference messages, guest preaching on YouTube. And that's probably the best place if you want to listen to some of my sermons. You can find all my books on Amazon. And on my website, website, I have a free gift for your listeners if they go there. I know we talked about finances, but it's a short read called 7 Biblical Insights for Christ-Centered Marriages. And if people just go to my website, they can download that for free, and I hope it'd be a blessing to them. And so, this will be in the show notes. Dorsey will put my website and probably maybe the Amazon link there so they can find stuff. And if anyone has any questions, there's a contact page on my website. People can reach out to me, if I can help you in some way. And so I appreciate what you're doing, Dorsey. I appreciate you and your ministry. Thanks for encouraging so many people by your joy and attitude. And it's just a privilege to come on the show with you today. So thank you. God bless you and your listeners.
God bless you as well. Guys and girls, we thank you again for coming on and listening and being encouraged and inspired by this episode. And until next time, God bless. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for joining Dorsey Ross on this episode of The Dorsey Ross Show. Please like, share, and tell others about the show. Also, please check out the other podcast episodes. And if you would like, donate to this podcast and buy Dorsey a coffee. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.